And the Bank of Canada is holding its key interest rate at 5% and signaling that it's getting closer to rate cuts. We'll have more on what that means for homeowners coming up. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to testify this afternoon at the inquiry into foreign interference in Canada's elections. And then a surprise move. The government is supporting an NDP bill calling for intimate partner violence to be declared an epidemic. Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Bakari Savage. A command post has been set up in North York as police continue the search for a missing senior. Norman was last seen yesterday around noon in the Torbury Road and Shepherd area. Norman's described as being 5'10", with gray curly hair, brown eyes, and was last seen wearing a dark-colored baseball hat, red and blue shirt, blue jeans, a black jacket, and black and white shoes. Police are concerned for their safety and are asking anyone with information to come forward. This is a live look at the command post right there. Well, a woman has life-threatening injuries after being hit by a vehicle on the 403. This happened around 12:30 this morning on the eastbound 403 near Waterton Down Road. Well, police say that they got a report of a pedestrian walking on the highway who was hit by a transport truck. Her name has not been released. The highway was closed for several hours for the investigation, but it has since reopened. In a surprise move, the government is supporting an NDP bill calling for intimate partner violence to be declared an epidemic.
Well, there's not many days when we do something like that, so I want to thank the government for agreeing today. I think all of us here often feel like we have a great privilege in being able to speak for so many who have been more directly impacted often by things like intimate partner violence. And I always say it's a privilege that we are able to be the ones to be here to advocate. And I do want to thank the government.
There are a number of supports that have been put in place, but I think it is fair to say that as we continue to hear more, that we have to do even more in terms of responding to this. We have a very good program with respect to human trafficking that the member for Haliburton Kawartha Lakes Brockton, and in fact all members of this House did. I think it is an example of what we can accomplish when we work together on this.
With close to 100 municipalities having declared IPV an epidemic, I strongly urge all members to vote in support of Bill 173. I agree that it's not symbolic. It's critical for victims, family members, survivors, and those who are living isolated to hear a loud and clear message that they are heard, they are believed, and they're being responded to by the government of Ontario.
Well, the NDP had accused the government of pushing back at previous attempts to get IPV declared an epidemic. Well, a major milestone in the fight against pharmacy robberies. Toronto Police, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, and Ontario College of Pharmacists say that all pharmacies across the province are reporting the use of time-delayed safes. The safes help to secure narcotics such as oxycodone, morphine, and codeine. Pharmacy robberies in Toronto began to drop sharply last year and have decreased to a total of just 10 so far in 2024. That's compared to 60 at this time last year.
Pharmacy robberies were very lucrative. Each pill obtained was sold for profit, and there was an obvious demand. The public safety concerns around these robberies are significant. Criminals were often using stolen vehicles to commit these crimes, which is thereby creating a victim of auto theft. They were violently attacking pharmacists, staff, and putting the safety of customers at risk. And of course, the drugs would end up on the street, contributing to the opioid epidemic that is resulting in overdose deaths and having a traumatic and devastating effect on our communities.
We are in an era where we are facing challenges with both an opioid crisis and pharmacy robberies. These have become prevalent issues for our communities, and we must find solutions to address them to ensure everyone's safety and well-being. Time-delayed safes are designed to open only after a predetermined delay, making immediate access to controlled substances more difficult. This feature significantly diminishes the appeal of pharmacies as targets for criminals looking for quick theft opportunities.
We know from our law enforcement partners and those who target pharmacies rely on speed to enter, to acquire stored narcotics, and exit quickly. By requiring narcotics to be stored in time-delayed safes that could only be opened after a minimum amount of time has elapsed, it denies perpetrators of the ability to get in and out of pharmacies quickly with stolen narcotics. It deters pharmacy robberies from happening in the first place.
Time-delayed safes use an electronic timer which prevents access until a preset period of time has elapsed after the combination has been entered. Well, the city is breaking ground on a new civic center in Etobicoke. The project is located at Bloor and Kipling. It's going to be an anchor for the mixed-use community development coming to the area. The goal is to develop 2,700 new homes, a new city park, public spaces, and a mix of amenities. The project is also the largest of the 22 sites included in the city's Housing Now initiative.
Imagine this, when it's done, we have over 3,000 units, probably 5,000 plus people are going to move in, minimum. And there would be a complete community, amenities. It has new streets, it has rental buildings, condos, affordable housing, and library, community center, art gallery, and more. What a neighborhood.
Mayor Chow says that the project is the first civic center to be built in the city in the last 50 years. Well, Ontario Place for All presented findings of an audit today on the plan to build a major private spa on the waterfront. And it says that it shows taxpayers may be on the hook.
From what we currently know about this arrangement, it's a really uneven partnership between Therme, a private Austrian mega spa company, and the Ontario taxpayer. Therme will put in about $450 million, while the Ontario taxpayer is putting in over $1 billion. Put another way, Therme is putting in 33 cents while the taxpayer puts in $1. Then Therme enjoys all of the profits from our investment. What is in it for Ontarians when we have so many other pressing priorities $1 billion could go to? We have no idea what the lease details are. We have no idea what's in this for Ontarians. Why the secrecy?
The group also highlights the impact building the spa and moving the science center will have on gridlock, creating headaches for people heading in and out of the city. They are asking the provincial government to release the financial model market analysis that led to the decision to give Therme a 95-year lease at Ontario Place. Well, Premier Doug Ford received a unique gift from an MPP on the other side of the aisle at Queen's Park. Liberal parliamentary leader John Fraser gave Ford a can of mushroom gravy in the legislature. Fraser says that the stunt was meant to remind the Premier 48 of his staff are on the Sunshine List, and they were paid more than $100,000 last year. Those salaries work out to nearly $7 million. In 2022, there were 31 staffers on the list. Ford and his late brother, Rob, frequently pledged to stop the so-called gravy train during their time at Toronto City Hall. And the Bank of Canada is once again holding its key interest rate steady at 5%. And CTV's Scott Hurst joins us now with more on the rate pause. Okay, Scott, what reason did the Bank of Canada give for holding its rate at 5%?
Bakari, this was a highly anticipated rate decision, not so much that we were expecting them to cut the rate at this time, but because there was so much talk about when they might cut, and at the moment this could be the last time the Bank of Canada holds the interest rate at 5%, as many economists are looking for a policy shift and when that might start to happen. This is the 6th straight time the central bank will have held the key lending rate at 5%. Now, bottom line, according to the Bank of Canada, inflation is still too high and risks remain that could drive up inflation once again. So that is why they are holding the key rate at 5%, but ultimately saying monetary policy is working, expecting inflation to continue continue to move closer to the 2% target range. Of course, we're nowhere near the 8.1% that we saw back in June 2022. So now we're currently sitting with the interest rate at 5%. The Bank of Canada says growth in the economy appears to be picking up, expecting GDP growth to be solid this year. And considering how long to hold the policy rate, they're looking for more evidence that this will be sustainable and sustained where inflation will continue to get to that 2% target rate. Here's more from the Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem.
I realize that what most Canadians want to know is, when are we going to lower our policy rate? What do we need to see to be convinced to cut? The short answer is we are seeing what we need to see, but we need to see it for longer to be confident that the progress towards price stability will be sustained. The further decline we've seen in inflation is very recent. We need to be assured it's not just a temporary dip.
And Makar, the latest consumer price index, the latest inflation rate is currently sitting at 2.8%, and we're expecting our next consumer price index report coming out next week. Now, the Bank of Canada governor was asked point blank after his opening remarks. The very first question from reporters was exactly this: can we expect a rate cut in June? That is the next rate announcement. And the Bank of Canada, before answered, really hummed and hawed and said, it's not out of the realm of possibility. But when you think about that answer and go back to the way he answered those questions, looking at more sustained progress, it's not out of the realm of possibility, it seems. But July could be another time where we might see our first interest rate cut as well, Bakari.
Okay, not great news, not bad news, but we'll take it. CTV's Scott Harris, thanks.
Thanks, Bakari.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to take a closer look at what today's Bank of Canada interest rate means for consumers. The Bank of Canada is holding its key interest rate at 5% and signaling that it's getting closer to rate cuts. So for a closer look at what this means for homeowners, we're joined live by Tam Hudak, CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. Tam, we just have to start off with this. No surprise? Any surprise?
No surprise, but I am getting worried, Bakar. Let me tell you why. It is hard enough for a young family expecting their first kid, trying to get into the housing market, and they've done everything they were told, right? They got good jobs, they got the degree, they saved up every penny they could, and the affordability crisis is getting deeper. My concern here is interest rates been too high for far too long. That's pushing home ownership out of reach, and it's making it awful difficult also to build new homes because it makes it more difficult to finance construction.
Okay, so Tim, speaking of holding at 5%, no guarantee that this is going to go down anytime in the near future. Let's say people decide to pull the trigger now. How much money could they be leaving on the line, or could they be putting themselves out of if they pull the trigger now as opposed to waiting?
That's a tough one, right? Every real estate deal is going to be different. So I always say work with your professional realtor. They'll understand where the market is going, the competition for a home that you have your eye on, or how much you get for your own, right? So the market's a bit quieter. I think it will definitely pick up when interest rates come down. So that's the factor that will work against you. There's going to be more competition in the marketplace, but you may save on your mortgage. Best answer, really talk to your realtor and your financial advisor to make the right decision for you and your family.
Okay, let's talk about impact. What are you seeing? What have you been seeing, and what are you seeing right now?
Yeah, I'm getting angry at this, to be direct. I think that our federal institutions, like the Bank of Canada, have had the stranglehold on for too long. They're breaking their deal, Bakar. They said that if we got inflation under control, which it now is, and by the way, if you take out housing costs, you take out mortgage costs, and you take out rental costs, it's even lower. So it's time to reduce rates. You know, you see initiatives happening from the Ford government. They've got a new housing bill today. You see the Trudeau government rolling out initiatives to get more homes built to help affordability. But you have these national institutions like the Bank of Canada, CMHC, and OSFI that are going the opposite direction. So when you're in a boat and you're rowing one way and you have a crew who are rowing the opposite, we're not getting anywhere. It's time to actually cut rates and cut them now.
And where we are right now, what do you want to say?
Let's get moving, right? It should have happened now. I think the further we put this down the road, the less affordable homes are going to be. And let me tell you, the CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, has a role to play to help get more homes built. They seem to be adrift right now with no leadership. There's another institution called OSFI that regulates the banks. They've actually made it harder to loan money for mortgages or for construction of new homes. And now Bank of Canada keeps the rates up too long. Our federal institutions are actually working and pushing homeownership out of reach despite the best efforts of those who are elected.
All right, Tim Hudak, CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, we're going to talk to the Canadian Women's Foundation about the Ford government supporting an NDP bill to declare intimate partner violence an epidemic. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to testify this afternoon at the inquiry into foreign interference in Canada's elections. And CTV's Mike Lecouture joins us live from Ottawa with the latest. And Mike, we just heard from Minister Bill Blair, who was talking about his previous position as Minister of Border Security and Organized Crime Reduction.
Yeah, and he was also talking about how he was also the Minister of Public Safety at the time, and how he had some of the highest levels of clearance, so he was able to see that level of intelligence. He also spoke about an intelligence briefing that he had with CSIS after the 2019 election, and specifically it was about the Don Valley North riding, and we know that is where the riding of Hang Dong is, and there was that alleged Chinese interference there. And he said in that meeting there were concerns that were raised about the nomination process in Don Valley North, and he talks about how there was intelligence which did suggest that there had been a number of irregularities, and a number of people who had participated, and that it could have been influenced by the People's Republic of China or people working on behalf of the People's Republic of China. In the end, though, what they decided was that that information did not suggest that the election was compromised, so essentially there was no action taken on it. And that is a bit of a theme that we're seeing in this, that there is intelligence and information about interference, but the difference that they make in terms of the security apparatus is interference versus impact, and whether or not it had any kind of influence in the actual outcome of the election. We know they've said it a bunch of times here in terms of the 2019 and 2021 elections. They were both held in a free and fair manner, and that interference did not have an impact on it. But still, I think it is giving a lot of Canadians a real sort of peek behind the curtain here and understanding what is going on and the foreign actors that are trying to get involved in Canada's democratic processes.
And Mike, we know that we are expecting to hear from Prime Minister Trudeau later today. Who else is on deck?
Yeah, after Bill Blair, we have Dominic LeBlanc, who is the current Minister of Public Safety. So this is really sort of building through the layers and echelons of government to see who knew what and what information they did have, and then what they did with said information. And that will build to the Prime Minister. We got a bit of a preview of what we can expect from that testimony later on this afternoon, when we had heard yesterday from his inner circle, his Chief of Staff, his Deputy Chief of Staff, the head of the 2019 election campaign for the Liberals, and understanding that they had information as well, and they get briefings on a regular basis. One of the key things will be this 2023 briefing that the Prime Minister's office had received, where it talked about alleged Chinese interference and saying that there is clear evidence that they did interfere in the 2021 and the 2019 elections. Whether or not those words were just talking points on the page and were actually uttered at that meeting, or whether they remained on that page, that will be key, because the members of the Prime Minister's office yesterday said clearly that is the first time that they had seen those words and that they had heard them, and that they did not hear them in that meeting. Therefore, it did not get to the Prime Minister. So I think that will be the key thing that a lot of people will be looking at here.
And Mike, what about timeline with this inquisition?
with the inquiry finishing, this was supposed to be the last day, but they have especially recalled one more day on Friday because they are getting David Vigneault, the head of CSIS, Canada's spy agency, to come back and actually explain those briefings, because a number of the parties and the lawyers here, the counsel for the parties, have said there is this disconnect between whether or not this was a briefing document, whether or not this was actually shown to the government and to the Prime Minister's office, or whether they were just talking notes and speaking notes, I should say, that never made it to the Prime Minister. So to try and connect those dots, we will have David Vigneault back before the inquiry on Friday. Okay, CTV's Mike Lecouture live in Ottawa. Thanks, Mike. Thank you. And a surprise move. The government is supporting an NDP bill calling for intimate partner violence to be declared an epidemic. And for reaction, we're joined live by Anuradha Dugal, Vice President of Community Initiatives at the Canadian Women's Foundation. Thank you very much for taking time to join us. We have to talk about this. Intimate partner violence is now an epidemic. What does that mean?
Well, first of all, it means the rates are extremely high for women and gender diverse people across Canada. The global rate, according to the World Health Organization, is that more than 40% of women will experience gender-based violence in their lifetimes. That's why we need it declared a pandemic, or an epidemic, because the numbers are so serious for women in all walks of life all across Canada.
What does this mean for victims?
First of all, it takes the idea that intimate partner violence is a private affair out and away from families and makes it a public health priority, which means increased funding, better responses from services, and government attention that will be ongoing and long-term. This is the only way we will be able to end gender-based violence and intimate partner violence throughout Canada. In Ontario, as a province, this is the best move that we could see happen for the next steps to end it.
So what does this mean for those who actually commit this violence?
It means that the crime is taken seriously. It also means that it is understood that it is something that has prevention measures attached to it. Very often we are faced with the crime after it happens. By putting a public health lens on it and making it an epidemic in Ontario, the importance of prevention that starts young and goes on all through our lives, just as if it were a health issue such as smoking or such as the flu or such as COVID, intimate partner violence will get the attention it needs to end it.
And when speaking about the importance of this, I'd like for you to talk about this, the cycle of this, for those who don't understand, well, why can't you just leave? Remove yourself from the situation.
It's really important for people to understand that it's not only physical violence, it can also be psychological, it can be financial, it can be sexual, it can be religious violence. And it's tied up in a sense that if the victim leaves, they will perhaps lose connection to their family. They may lose custody. They fear that they may lose custody of their children. They are often told that they are nothing, that they are worthless. This is the kind of psychological violence many victims face. And so they don't believe that they can leave and be successful after leaving that abusive situation. It may also be tied to immigration. No one's immigration is linked to their marital status if they are experiencing abuse, but it is very hard for that message to get through when people who are experiencing violence may be dependent on others who appear to hold all the cards.
And as we wrap up, how do you see this changing the landscape for victims?
So I would say that this is an important step. Ontario has joined many municipalities that have already declared intimate partner violence an epidemic. This means that on multiple, and we have a provincial, federal, territorial plans that harmonized services. So no matter where you are in Canada, you can expect the same services. It will help get money to women's shelters, which women need to go to in an emergency. It should also help our health services understand the impact of violence, increase counseling for victims, give prevention a boost that it needs for teens and young people, and will underline that this is not a stigma. This is not a taboo subject. This is a subject that everyone should care about, and it's not the fault of victims. This is beyond their control, and they need help to get out of this situation.
Anuradha Dougal, Vice President of Community Initiatives at the Canadian Women's Foundation. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, the Bank of Canada is holding its key interest rate at 5% and signaling that it's getting closer to rate cuts. We're going to have more on what that means for homeowners coming up. The Bank of Canada is holding its key interest rate at 5% and signaling that it's getting closer to rate cuts. We're going to have more on what that means for homeowners coming up. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is set to testify this afternoon at the inquiry into foreign interference in Canada's elections. And in a surprise move, the government is supporting an NDP bill calling for intimate partner violence to be declared an epidemic. Good afternoon and welcome to CP24 Live at noon. I'm Bakari Savage. A major milestone in the fight against pharmacy robberies. Toronto Police, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, and Ontario College of Pharmacists say all pharmacies across the province are reporting the use of time-delayed safes. The safes help to secure narcotics such as oxycodone, morphine, and codeine. Pharmacy robberies in Toronto began to drop sharply last year, and they have decreased to a total of just 10 so far in 2024. That's compared to 60 at this time last year.
Time delay safes have proven very effective at deterring robberies at pharmacies in other jurisdictions, such as Western Canada, where the number of instances have been drastically reduced. We anticipated that they would have the same impact in Toronto, and they have. In 2023, pharmacies in Toronto decreased by 23% compared to 2022. Year-to-date pharmacy robberies are down 82% compared to the same period in 2023.
Time-delayed safes enhance the safety and peace of mind of pharmacy staff and their customers. Pharmacy workers are on the front line, often facing the direct threat of violence in robbery situations, knowing that high-value medications are securely locked away and inaccessible to alleviate anxiety, allowing them to focus on providing care to their clients rather than the traumatic confrontations.
We know from our law enforcement partners and those who target pharmacies rely on speed to enter, to acquire stored narcotics, and exit quickly. By requiring narcotics to be stored in time-delayed safes that could only be opened after a minimum amount of time has elapsed, it denies perpetrators of the ability to get in and out of pharmacies quickly with stolen narcotics. It deters pharmacy robberies from happening in the first place.
Time-delayed safes use an electronic timer which prevents access until a preset period of time has elapsed after the combination has been entered. Well, a command post has been set up in North York as police continue to search for a missing senior. Norman was last seen yesterday around noon in the Torbury Road in Shepherd area. Norman's described as being 5'10", with gray curly hair, brown eyes, and was last seen wearing a dark colored baseball hat, red and blue shirt, blue jeans, a black jacket, and black and white shoes. Police are concerned for their safety. They're asking anyone with information to come forward, and you can also visit this command center that has been set up as the search continues. A woman has life-threatening injuries after being struck by a vehicle on the 403. This happened around 12:30 this morning on the eastbound 403 near Waterdown Road. Police say that they got a report of a pedestrian walking on the highway and was hit by a transport truck. Her name has not been released. The highway was closed for several hours. That was for the investigation, but it has since reopened. In a surprise move, the government is supporting an NDP bill calling for intimate partner violence to be declared an epidemic.
Well, there's not many days when we do something like that, so I want to thank the government for agreeing today. I think all of us here often feel like we have a great privilege in being able to speak for so many who have been more directly impacted often by things like intimate partner violence. And I always say it's a privilege that we are able to be the ones to be here to advocate. And I do want to thank the government.
There are a number of supports that have been put in place, but I think it is fair to say that as we continue to hear more, that we have to do even more in terms of responding to this. We have a very good program with respect to human trafficking that the member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brockton, and in fact all members of this House did. I think it is an example of what we can accomplish when we work together on this.
We have only to read our local papers, listen to media, be online to know that femicide continues to happen across our province. There is no immunity to violence in relationships for any group, any community, culture, faith, or gender. There's no community across this province that has not been impacted by femicide.
This bill is a very simple and elegant request. It actually addresses a number of challenges that we're seeing in Ontario. But let me bring you back to how we got here. On a September morning in 2015, Ontario lost 3 women to preventable gender-based violence when they were murdered in Renfrew County. Anastasia Kuzik, Nathalie Warmerdon, and Carol Cullington were victims of intimate partner violence, all killed by the same man. The perpetrator had a history of abusive behavior towards these women.
Well, the NDP had accused the government of pushing back at previous attempts to get IPV declared an epidemic. Well, the Bank of Canada is once again holding its key interest rate study at 5%. And BNM Bloomberg's Paul Bagnall joins us live now with reaction to today's Bank of Canada announcement. Okay, Paul, look. The weather's heating up, but these interest rates are not cooling off. What gives?
Well, the Bank of Canada is sending some pretty clear signals in its own way that the table is being set for rate cuts, if not in June, then in late July. So the Bank of Canada made a policy announcement this morning. The next one comes on June the 5th. The one that comes after that is June the 24th. Tiff Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada, was asked point blank in a press conference at about 10:45 this morning, is a rate cut in June possible? And he said that is, quote, his words, in the realm of possibilities. And for Tiff Macklem and the Bank of Canada, that's about as blunt and as candid as it gets. So the bank is saying it is considering a cut in June. What the market is believing is that a cut in June is now more possible than it was yesterday, perhaps, given what the Bank of Canada said about inflation today. And if not in June, I think everybody who watches the bank closely thinks a cut in July is basically a lock.
Okay, so Paul, I need some levity, a little bit of perspective on what's happening today. How do we stack up against the U.S. and the U.K., London?
Right. It's a great question, and it's a timely question because this morning in the U.S., new inflation numbers were released, and they showed again for the third consecutive month that inflation's running stronger than expected. And so the takeaway there is that the U.S. Fed doesn't have a lot of wiggle room yet to start seriously considering cutting rates. So in other words, rates will stay at their high level, 5.25%, for a longer period of time is what markets believe. And we saw stock markets tank this morning as soon as those numbers were released. So it's a very different picture. There are also big implications for the Canadian dollar when you talk about interest rates in the U.S. versus interest rates in Canada. What we seem to be setting up for is a period where rates will stay higher in the U.S. for a longer period of time, perhaps come down in Canada. That would be a big negative for the Canadian dollar. Low interest rates, all other things being equal, tend to be a negative for a domestic currency. And indeed, at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, when those inflation numbers were released, we saw the Canadian dollar drop by about half a cent.
And speaking of, what about the ripple effect? The economy in general, based upon what you have seen, you've witnessed, What do you think is going on? What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, the big influence on Canadian inflation remains housing costs, and it's somewhat ironic because one reason housing costs are so high is that the Bank of Canada dialed up interest rates and they affected mortgage rates. But many other measures, food inflation, for instance, are beginning to come down. And the bank said that the 3-month trend, which is something it watched very, very closely, is down, and that's good news. And it removed a statement that it made in March that it was still concerned about upward pressure on inflation. And that's something, again, that Bank of Canada's watchers look at very carefully. They look at the March statement, they look at the April statement, and they look at the words that have changed in the final paragraph of the statement, and that's one change.
And relief by this summer. That is great.
That seems to be in the picture. Now, keep in mind, it would be a rate cut almost certainly of only 1/4 of a percentage point, and that would likely be passed on fairly quickly to variable rate mortgage holders, but you'd have to wait a longer period of time for more rates and a larger total reduction in interest rates.
Ben M. Bloomberg's Paul Bagnall. Thank you very much.
Thanks a ton.
And right now it's 12:42, 17 degrees. Let's get a check on the roads with Adjua and Celia Blah. Hey, Adj.
Hey, Bakari, good afternoon. And we are dealing with a problem on this sunny Wednesday on the northbound lanes of the 427 in the collectors right through Burnham Thorpe. A stalled vehicle. It's off to the side, but we do have MTO crews blocking on that right lane and shoulder. Getting busier in the collectors, but the express lanes are moving swimmingly, so that's probably where you want to be. On to the Gardiner, traveling on the eastbound side. Extremely busy, at least for this time of day, from the South Kingsway out to Strawn. The reason we continue to deal with that long-term maintenance, the camera through here left out, but it is the left lane that is blocked. Headed towards the Don Valley Parkway, it looks like the Gardner cameras and the DVP cameras are out, but on the DVP North, just as you make your way through Lawrence, we are dealing with a stalled vehicle. It does have the right lane blocked. Bakari, I'll send it back to you.
The CP24 traffic report is brought to you by capitaldirect.ca.
And coming up next on CP24 Live at noon, today is the International Day of Pink. We're going to take a closer look at the significance of the day. That's coming up. Airline catering workers have voted overwhelmingly in favor of a strike. More than 800 employees of Gate Gourmet Canada could walk off the job as early as Tuesday. They include cooks, warehouse staff, and other food and beverage workers who supply in-flight meals served by major airlines, including Air Canada and WestJet. Wages and safety are the key issues. The Teamsters Union tells CP24 that they are entering 2 days of mediation starting tomorrow, and that if the employer does not table a fair offer, they're going to strike. If that happens, hundreds of flights every day will likely be impacted. And from the skies to the streets, Uber's rolling out some new safety features starting today. Riders can choose from a bundle of new measures that can be customized to automatically turn on based on time of location or day. Well, they can now record audio during the trip, and if something goes wrong, send that recording to Uber. And customers can also set up a 4-digit PIN code to provide to the driver to ensure that they're getting into the right car. A feature called Ride Check can detect if a ride goes off course, ends early, or stops unexpectedly, and sends an in-app check-in to make sure everything is okay. And riders can automatically share their live location and trip details with a friend or family member. Well, Ontario Place for All presented findings of an audit today on the plan to build a major private spa on the waterfront and pointed to concerns previously raised by Blue Jays President Mark Shapiro about the impact of traffic on fans trying to get to games.
Add all the cars and buses going to Therme and the Ontario Science Centre that will be unfortunately demolished and a diminished version moved to Ontario Place. And I think Mr. Shapiro and spa goers will be very impacted by traffic. I'd add the Gardiner Expressway lanes will also be reduced for the next few years, adding to the gridlock. Gridlock, which this mega spa and the Science Centre, bringing those right downtown, it will cost the Canadian economy.
And the group also highlights the impact building the spa and moving the Science Centre will have on gridlock, creating headaches for people heading in and out of the city. They're asking the provincial government to release the financial model, market analysis that led to the decision to give Therme a 95-year lease at Ontario Place. And Premier Doug Ford received a unique gift from an MPP on the other side of the aisle at Queen's Park. Liberal parliamentary leader John Fraser gave Ford a can of mushroom gravy in the legislature. Fraser says that the stunt was meant to remind the Premier 48 of his staff are on the Sunshine List They were paid more than $100,000 last year. Those salaries work out to nearly $7 million. In 2022, there were 31 staffers on the list. Ford and his late brother, Rob, frequently pledged to stop the so-called gravy train during their time at Toronto City Hall. And the Bank of Canada is holding its key interest rate at 5% and signaling that it's getting closer to rate cuts. And for a closer look at what this means for homeowners, we're joined live in studio by Ron Butler, mortgage broker for Butler Mortgage. So, Ron, if the rate does decrease this summer, I'm hearing that it's not going to be a significant amount. What are you advising clients?
Well, we continue to advise clients to avoid variable rates and to select 2 or 3 year fixed rates. Not 5-year rates will come down eventually, so locking in today at a higher rate may not be the right move.
So what does this mean? I mean, we're holding at 5%. I was waiting to maybe the end of this year to get a house. Pull the trigger, wait it out until January. What are you saying?
Well, we'll have lower rates by January. There's really no doubt we will. So rates will be down by January. We just have to be patient. They thought at the beginning of the year we'd be down already. We'd be down in April. So didn't happen, and we're just going to have to wait, be patient.
So for those who are holding variable mortgage rates right now, what do you suggest?
We suggest if they're coming up for renewal, that they look at a 2 or 3 year fixed. Now, if the renewal is far away, you could have to continue to be patient because there's no sense in locking into a high rate today because that's where you'd be. You'd be a rate in the 5s. And if you're just patient another few months, you're probably going to see your rates in the 4s.
And when it comes to dollars and cents, how much money are we talking about in terms of like a 0.25% rate decrease?
Oh, it's not necessarily that much. It might only be like $30 a month, $35 a month. But what it signals is the beginning of the cuts. Like there's no such thing as one cut and stopped. There'll always be more cuts and more cuts into next year, into 2025.
Overall, what does this mean?
What does this mean? We're in a situation where we will have to wait longer for lower rates, but most certainly we're going to see lower rates by the end of the year.
And for the mortgage business, how does that play out?
It plays out lousy. It's been a consistently lousy mortgage year so far. Purchases were down. House purchases went up in Ontario in January and February and fell in March, coming off the worst year in 24 years. So mortgage business is going to continue to be slow until the rate cuts happen.
What type of effect, if any, does this have on the down payment that people need to make for their mortgages?
Not much effect on down payment, but effect on qualification. So if mortgage rates fall, you qualify for more mortgage on a bigger house.
Okay, so that part right there is very important. I need you to repeat that, and then also, a little bit of how you're advising clients to handle that.
Well, again, it probably is important to pause, to step back, because you will qualify for more of a mortgage with a lower rate. Even though we have stress tests of 2%, you still qualify for more mortgage, therefore more house, if you're patient and wait for a few more months.
And so, again, going back to something that you said earlier, this has been lousy for the industry. Let's talk about rebounds. Are there any such things as, specials or specialties, getting people to come back? Because, as you said, in January, things are going to change. This is going to be different.
Absolutely. There's really no specials in the mortgage business. Banks are a little more aggressive on rate at this precise moment in time, but the bond yields are going against it. So we're set back a little bit. Again, I think the whole story that we've observed is we expected a lot to happen coming into this year, a lot of rate decrease, and it just hasn't happened yet. We gotta hold on and see what happens soon.
And when it comes to applying for these mortgages, let's say I applied for a mortgage a few months ago, can I reapply for another mortgage to have more buying power once these rates go down?
Absolutely true. You have an opportunity once the rates go down to go back to your banker, your mortgage broker, and say, hey, I think I qualify for more. Where am I at?
Okay, Ron Butler, mortgage broker, Butler Mortgage. Thank you very much. That's always a mouthful for me. We really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Ron.
Thanks, Bakari.
Well, the Toronto District School Board is marking International Day of Pink. The day is meant to focus on standing up against discrimination directed towards 2S LGBTQ+ communities. The board is also recognizing the 50th anniversary of the Brunswick 4, whose actions initiated a national conversation about queer and lesbian discrimination in Canada for the first time. And also, the city is breaking ground on a new civic center. It's going to be in Etobicoke. The project is located at Bloor and Kipling. It'll be an anchor for the mixed-use community development coming to the area. And the goal is to develop 2,700 new homes, a new city park, public spaces, and a mix of amenities. The project is also the largest of the 22 sites included in the city's Housing Now initiative. And thank you for watching CP24 Live at noon.